Is it possible to take your food scraps after a little meal prep or a little cooking session, maybe even just some scraps from the garden, and turn it into usable compost, usable biomass in less than a day? Usually a composting process takes quite a while. Even hot composting, quickest you're looking at is maybe a month turnaround time if you're using a tumble composter and you're turning it like crazy. Seems like the answer is yes. This is an electric composter. It's from Food Cycle Science, and it's called the Food Cycler. So it's a pretty big machine. It's actually pretty heavy too, so it's pretty hefty. And what we're gonna do in today's video is we're gonna see how long it takes for this amount of food scraps, which is maybe like 2 to 3 pounds or so, something that might happen if you're cooking for your family. And we're gonna say, okay, let's put it in the food cycler, see how long it takes to break down, see what it looks like at the end of the process, and then we'll talk about, okay, how would you actually use this? Who would it be maybe right for? Does this even make sense at all as a product to use? It's just an interesting concept for the electric composter. So you have this little drum thing here, and you dump your food scraps in the drum, put the cover on, turn it on, and then what it'll do is it basically acts as a dehydrator grinder. So it'll dehydrate. There's a couple filters in the back, and you can actually feel the hot air coming out. And then what happens is once it's all dry, it'll start turning, kind of like a butter churn or something. You can see these little arms in here that will just start, and then it just grinds it up. And so at the very end of the video, I'm gonna show you what this amount of biomass will turn into in maybe 3-4 hours. We'll see how long it takes. Kind of depends on what you put in there. So stay tuned, let's jump into it, and I hope you like the video. First step is pretty simple. We're just dumping all of our scraps in here. We have some kind of overripe cucumbers, we got some coffee grinds, lemon rinds, a little bit of avocado, we have avocado peel, and you gotta make sure you don't overfill. Oops, dropped one. Part of the sloppy life that I live, I guess. So yeah, you gotta make sure you don't overfill. There's a little fill line right here. You just gotta not go over that and you're good to go. Looks like we're right about on target. That's really it. I mean, now it's full. Now we're just going to set it all up and plug it in. Alrighty, top needs to go on. Just slide it in, crank it like that, and press this button, and we're off to the races. It is officially 10:18 a.m. So let's see how long it takes. Just to show you what's going on in the back, you have this filter panel, and this is where the hot air from dehydrating the produce actually comes out. So this is kind of what the back of it looks like. It's a pretty large machine, if I'm being honest with you. It's pretty big, but seems to do the job pretty well. So I'm excited to see what it turns out in a couple hours. Okay, it's been about 5.5 hours or so, a little bit less than that. We started at 10:14, it's about 3:30-ish. So here we go, let's open it up, let's see what happens. Remember, we had about 2-3 pounds of food waste in here. Let's see what it turned out to be. Got our handy little handle, do this. Take a look in here. So here it is. You can see it's massively reduced in size. And let me just give you some of the sounds here. It's very flaky, very crispy, almost like little vegetable chips. Take a look at that. You can see bits of avocado rind, bits of cucumber, probably some lime in there, and the coffee grounds. But I'm going to dump it into this bowl here, and we're gonna see exactly how much reduction in size we have in volume. So check that out. It's very flaky. It's very much like a chip type of texture, and quite lightweight because we've removed all the water, right? And so this is pretty much ready to go into whatever system you want it to. If you want to throw it in a vermicomposting bin, you can. If you want to throw it in your actual compost, you can. If you want to throw it in your soil, you can. So I know what you're thinking, probably the same thing that I have thought in using the food cycler, and that is, what's actually the point of this? Is there a reason to use this to create this little beautiful flaky organic matter, or is there a better thing to use? There's so many different ways to compost your food waste. This is another option. There's a lot of different considerations that come to it. So the most common question, the question I had right out of the gate was, how much power does this use? Because if it uses more power than just sort of throwing it in a worm bin or throwing it in a hot composting bin, if it's drastically more, even though it's faster, maybe it's not that worth it, right? And so the draw of the unit is 500 watts, but a typical cycle typically runs 1 kilowatt hour, which means whatever your city charges you for a kilowatt hour is how much it's going to charge you to run one cycle of the food cycler. So for me, I forgot exactly, but it's not super expensive. It's definitely under 25 cents. So can be very effective if I want a quick little hit of some organic matter. I can mix this into soil at about 1 part per 12 of soil. So kind of, I could even flake this up a little bit finer into like more of a powder, and that would help it break down even quicker in my soil. Then I could throw this maybe into some potting with some house plants, the ones behind me, maybe a little bit of a vegetable garden as a quick organic fertilizer. Could be a fantastic use. You could throw this into a worm bin. And the other question that I think a lot of people have is, what can you actually put into this? What can you put into it? What can you not put into it? So I'm actually going to pull up the site and just go straight off the site for you guys. I was actually very surprised at what you could process in this, because a lot of typical composting systems, you're not going to be able to put meat, fish, shellfish, and poultry scraps in them, whereas you can in the food cycle, which I thought was pretty cool. Fruit and veggie scraps, of course, cereals and grains, cheeses. Typically, you're not putting dairy in your worm bin. You're not putting dairy in your hot compost bin, so it can make short work of that. Chicken and fish bones, which I think is kind of cool, and it might even powderize those and create almost like a bone meal type of amendment there. Coffee grounds, which you saw me do. You could even add the coffee filter, which I did not do. Eggs and eggshells, and even pet food. So like unused pet food you could totally do. Things that you wouldn't want to do, which kind of makes sense, just use your intuition, would be like hard bones, beef, candy, cooking oils, pits. I almost put in the pit of the avocado, said maybe not, and it turns out that was actually a smart call. Nuts and hard shells, and pineapple leaves. So it's just a really, really interesting system. Now, is it pricey? For sure, it's pretty pricey. It's like $350. So if you don't have the budget for it, it's definitely on that higher end of product out there. But maybe if you're like an eco-conscious condo dweller, I could see it making sense. For me, it's a supplemental use to the other systems that I have going on. I have my hot compost bin out in the front yard, and I have my vermicomposting bin out in my side yard, that most of my fresh food scraps just go straight into the vermicomposting bin, work their way through as worm castings. But for something like this, say I'm doing like a big meal prep or a big vegetable process or harvest, I can actually throw 3-ish pounds into the food cycler and run that and make quick work and really break it down to this size. So I just figured it was a cool thing to show you guys. I'm always interested in different ways of composting and trying to make better use of our waste. So much of our food waste goes straight into our trash and then sits in the landfill, where you think, oh, not that big a deal because it'll break down. But not really, because most landfills are kind of anaerobic, and so it's not going to break down that much, and certainly not that fast. You need an aerobic environment for all the beneficial microorganisms to actually break down organic matter into its constituent components, and that's oftentimes not happening in a landfill. Plus, there's so much other junk in the landfill. Even if it was to break down, what good is that actually doing the environment? Pretty much no good at all, right? So if we can perhaps even use a little extra electricity, I know a lot of people will be hating on that, but if we can, then we may be able to repurpose our food scraps and divert them into a system that makes more sense for us, the environment, and our garden, because everything that I used here was scraps from my garden that's going to go back into the garden. So anyways, the food cycler, figured I'd bring it to you guys, an electric composter, kind of a cool little gadget. And let me know what you think down in the comments. Does it make sense? Would you actually buy something like this, or would you not? I'm actually really curious. I don't know who this makes sense for. So drop it in the comments down below, and I'll see you on the next one.